and the source of our addiction being trauma. And so what we develop early on is a way of coping with, escaping from the trauma and the pain. So instead of asking why the addiction, he says, why the pain? And so we have to go back and look at that pain to see what we are trying to push away, what we are trying to numb out from. It's easier for me than some people I've spoken to because my trauma is so easy to pinpoint. I am the child of an two alcoholics, actually, although my mother was the identified alcoholic. She was the problem, quote unquote. And my father was also an alcoholic, but he drove a nice car and he wore a nice suit and he was out in the world, so he was fine. Whereas my mother was depressed and home and messy. So she was the identified problem.
Welcome to Linda's Corner, where we bring more hope, healing, and happiness to the world. My name is Linda Bjork, and today we're going to be talking about addiction recovery for women. I'm delighted to welcome Patti Clark. Patti is the award-winning author of This Way Up and Recovery Road Trip. She has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, the Boston Globe, and more. You can reach Patti at her website, patticlark.org, and I'll include that link in the show notes. Welcome, Patti. I'm so glad that you could join with me today.
I am so happy to be here, Linda. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, this is so wonderful because we're going to be talking about something that's so important. And when you're stuck in that place of addiction and it feels so hopeless, I'm just delighted to be able to offer some hope to anyone who feels like there just isn't any. And I watched part of one of your interviews on NC Breakfast Show, and you talked about drunkorexia. And I thought, well, that's something I've never heard of before. Would you mind kind of explaining that?
Sure. That was on a morning show in New Zealand, and there had been a recent study done. I think that was in 2017, and it was a study about women, especially younger women, who were not eating in order to drink more in terms of calorie intake and in terms of not gaining weight and not taking up their calories with food. So they were drinking more on empty stomachs and sometimes then having bulimic episodes with alcohol to get rid of that after they already got the buzz. I mean, really incredibly unhealthy behavior. So combining so many pieces of addiction there. The worry about food, the worry about body and that addicted to image thing, the wanting of that buzz and getting high, and all of the social status around it. And what they were finding with the drunkorexia is the increase of the diseases that are associated with alcohol consumption, which is especially worse for women because of women's metabolism, because of the way our bodies are made up. And so that was exacerbated with that. So just so many compound problems.
Wow. And by addressing this idea, you've brought up so many different kinds of addictions. We can have that addiction to our appearance. We can have that addiction to, watching those calories. We can have definitely the addiction to the alcohol and what do I prefer? And then all of those food issues. It's just, we can really make a mess of ourselves.
Yeah. And an addiction, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Gabor Mate.
Uh-huh.
He's wonderful. Anyway, he talks about the source of our addiction being trauma. And so what we develop early on is a way of coping with, escaping from the trauma and the pain. So he says, instead of asking why the addiction, he says, why the pain? And so we have to go back and look at that pain to see what we are trying to push away, what we are trying to numb out from. And, all of those pieces come in there. And I know for myself, I can, in some ways, it's easier for me than some people I've spoken to because my trauma is so easy to pinpoint. It's so, I can just say, oh, yeah, well, there it is. Whereas I talk to some women, especially that didn't have too much of a dysfunctional home, don't have one or two places to nail it, and so have a harder time with that nebulous identification, shall we say.
Wow. I am so glad that you brought this up. It changes everything. And it's something
Mm,
that's super, super important to address. Addiction is not the problem. Addiction is our solution.
yeah,
It is our solution trying to handle something deeper. And when you
absolutely.
talked about, let's not ask about why the addiction, let's ask about why the pain, it kind of helps relieve some of the guilt and the shame
Ah, absolutely.
because
Absolutely.
we need to find what the source is. The way of coping, the way of trying to deal with our pain is not benefiting us. It's making us worse. But in our minds, at some level, it's supposed to be the solution.
Yeah,
Would you be comfortable sharing your story and
of
what
course.
trauma led you to your situation?
Of course. To tell my story, and I'm aware we only have 30 minutes, I will try to be brief, but I do have to go all the way back because it did start in childhood. I am the child of an alcoholic, well, two alcoholics actually, although my mother was the identified alcoholic. She was the problem, quote unquote. And my father was also an alcoholic, but he drove a nice car and he wore a nice suit and he was out in the world, so he was fine. Whereas my mother was depressed and home and messy. So she was the identified problem. And so there was a lot of dysfunction, a lot of disharmony in our home. My father left our home when I was 12 and my sister was 16. And uh, unfortunately, my mother unraveled a bit more from there. And then my sister left for college, and I was home alone with an alcoholic mother who was passing out before I got home. By the time I was 13, I was drinking every weekend. 14, I was drinking and taking acid and taking speed. I grew up near San Francisco, so there was a lot of that available in the 60s and 70s. And I remember vividly, viscerally, Linda, viscerally, almost boasting to my friends, oh, I don't have to be home. I can stay out as long as I want. So saying it like that with this bravado and inside dying. I wanted so badly for someone to be waiting up for me, for someone to be saying, you have to be home by 11 instead of having no limits whatsoever. It was heartbreaking as that child. And then when I was 16, my mother died of alcoholism. My sister was away at university, but not that far. She came home. My father had moved out. And suddenly, my father did move back. I wasn't left alone. But my father moved back after not having lived with me for 4 years. And I remember him coming in and saying, okay, there's going to be these rules and these rules. And me laughing at him and saying, you've been gone. I've been on, taking acid. I've been doing this. You can't come in and, throw these rules. It was a huge fight, but luckily we found our way through. And that boundaries that he did put in place, I think, were part of the thing that saved me. I did focus. I did finish high school well. I'm very lucky that school came easily for me because I didn't work very hard, but it came relatively easily. And then I went to university to Berkeley, and yeah, it was crazy at times, but graduated, and then drove across country and ended up going to Alaska, where I was a bartender, which was very dangerous. But I had one incredible experience, Linda, that I'd like to share. I, my boyfriend then, my husband now, came to Alaska, stayed with me. He worked for a while, and then he went to Australia to work. And he wrote to me and asked me to meet him and travel with him. And that same week that I got his letter, that very same week, I got a job offer, and I got to teach, because I was a teacher at that point. I was bartending at night and subbing at a high school during the day, and I got a job offer at that high school. And I got an offer to buy a condo by one of the other teachers. The condo next door to her was for sale. And in Alaska, this was the time of the oil boom. And so they were giving out loans to Alaska residents, no interest loans. And so I thought, okay, I can buy this place. I can take this job teaching. I can keep bartending. I was making stupid amounts of money because of the fishermen and the oil rigs, but my lifestyle was insane, absolutely insane. And I got this letter from Jeff, and they both stood in front of me. And at that point, even though I was still in a lot of pain and not doing well, I looked at this fork in the road, and it was really a spiritual moment. I can't think of a better way to put it. I stood at this fork in the road and thought, which do I do? Which do I do? And I heard a voice so loud saying, you have to go. If you stay, you're going to die. And I could start crying just explaining it. And luckily, Linda, I did. I went, and Jeff and I traveled, and we got married, and but anyway, luckily I made that choice. And then the next big choice that I made was in 1988, 2 years before my 30th birthday. I went to my first AA meeting and decided to stop drinking. So whatever that was, 36 years ago, is that right? And because I said to myself, Jeff and I were talking about having kids, and I said, I am not going to be my mother. I am not going to be my mother. And then I looked and I thought, and Jeff and I had quite a few fights about my drinking at that point. And so I said, and I don't want to lose Jeff. So I got sober in 1988, and I got sober in Tucson, Arizona at a women's meeting, and it was heaven. And I was on that pink cloud, and everything was wonderful. And in 1992, we moved to New Zealand, and recovery wasn't the same there. And one of the things I talk about in my book now on Recovery Road Trip was that feeling of, I just don't feel it anymore. And in what was it when I when did I start drinking again? In 2000. Yeah, it was in the year 2000. I decided that I was okay. I was good. I had it figured out. I had been sober for almost 13 years. I was doing all the readings. I'm a smart person. I figured it out. I've got this. And I decided I could drink again, and I was all good. And I was out drinking again. I was, controlling it, quote unquote. But it progressively got worse, and I was out drinking again for almost as long as I was in recovery. And finally, for slightly more, in 2014, right before This Way Up came out, I said, this is insane, Patti. What you're doing is insane. And I heard one of those voices again, and that's why I told the other story that said, if you continue doing this, Patti, you are going to die. And I had 2 beautiful sons and a lovely husband. But more importantly, Linda, was I wanted to do it for me. I wasn't doing it to be a good mother. I wasn't doing it to be a good partner. I wasn't doing it for not to be my mother. I was doing it because I said, you know what? I deserve this. I deserve to be clean, sober, happy, healthy, vibrant, strong. And so, yeah, I got sober again in 2014 and am now 10 years sober.
Congratulations.
Yes.
And
Thank
thank
you.
you for sharing that story And isn't it
Mm.
interesting as you've gone through so many different experiences, what started at the beginning and then the reasons to get out? I mean, you've had different options. One thought is, well, if you don't, you're going to die. I mean, you'd think that would be a pretty strong
You
motivator.
think that would be
And
enough?
it kind of is, but sometimes it's not enough.
Yeah,
And then the motivation of, I don't want to be my mother. That's a strong motivation when you've had a miserable experience, but that's not enough. There's a motivation of, do you know, I really love this man and I
mm,
don't want to lose him. And I want to be the kind of person that he wants. That's a good motivation, but it's not enough. I'm a mom and I have wonderful children and I want to be a good mom and I want to be there for them. That's a good motivation. And yet it's not enough. It really takes until we get to the place of, I want this. Not I should be doing this.
that's right.
I want it. I
And
want it.
I deserve it. And
And
I
I
deserve
deserve it. And when you come to the I deserve it part, it kind of goes back to what you said earlier about Gabor Mate, where the reason we are trying to solve whatever hurt we have is maybe we don't feel worthy. We don't feel like we
absolutely.
deserve anything good. So wherever we are, and and this is challenging for people who are loved ones of someone who is going through this, is we can support, but we can't make a choice for them. It
That's
won't
right.
work. You can help for a while, like the decision that your father made to set some boundaries. That can help. And maybe input from other people. But until we make a decision, we're not all in.
That's right.
Wow. Well, I'm proud of you for choosing in. And I'm proud of you for deciding that you deserve it because
Yeah.
you do.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to really emphasize something I heard one of your guests talk about, the one who had his finger chopped off. What a horrific story. Um, that as he said, and certainly for me, I went through a lot of therapy, and that's one of the things that I really found in recovery is when we get clean and sober, all of the stuff that we were drinking and using to push down comes up. So all that pain that was there that we were numbing out about, all that stuff that we pushed down and numbed out, it percolates up. And if we don't do the work, it is still there. And what I experienced my first time around, and one of the things in my book Recovery Road Trip, I interviewed a lot of women who relapsed, a lot, and the same story kept coming up, that they got sober, they did the steps, they worked the program, and then they were hurting and it was painful, and people drifted out. And it seemed like almost everyone I spoke to, until they did the work, they fell apart because, and that was one of the things that I experienced in New Zealand. The program, the recovery rooms in New Zealand, it was a much younger program than where I had in Tucson, where I was surrounded by all these young, vibrant women. And suddenly I went to the program in New Zealand, and most of the people there were old men. And their answer to me was, put a plug in the jug, come to a meeting, just don't drink. And I'd cry and say, but it's not working and I'm upset. Come to meetings, just don't drink, put a plug in the jug and sit and listen. You've got two ears and one mouth, listen. And it's like, so, and I'm not putting them down. If it was working for them, that's great. But for me, I needed so much more, and I needed to do a lot of work. And I think most of us who have grown up in dysfunctional families need to peel back those layers. They need to find some form of therapy, whatever it is, that works for them. And I did a lot of work to get to the point where I could say, Linda, where I could say, I'm worth it. I'm worth it.
Mm.
I don't want to do this to me anymore.
And that, I'm just thinking about trying to go through the process. An addiction is like a slave master, where I'm the slave and it owns me, and how much effort it takes to become free and to become
Mm,
sober. And then you think, I'm good to go. And then if we haven't addressed, as we mentioned at the very beginning, that underlying pain, then we've lost our numbing coping mechanism.
that's right.
And then we have to face the thing that we didn't want to face in the first place.
Absolutely.
So if our go-to is, oh, I don't like that feeling, that means I need a drink, it can be easy to just slide right back in. And you
Yeah.
mentioned you thought at first that, well, I'm in control. I mean,
Yeah.
people drink all the time.
All the
It doesn't
time.
mean they're all not. I mean, not everybody is an alcoholic who drinks. But if I am using alcohol to cover my pain, I can't drink. I need to address that underlying problem. And we have to do the work. Dang it, isn't we just want a magic pill and for it to all go away. But we need to face it.
Yeah.
That is the sad news.
Yeah. And we need to do that work because what we so often see is when someone gives up drugs,
Mhm.
alcohol, food, whatever it is that they're using addictively to stop, when the pain starts rising, they'll quite often pull on to another addiction. So you'll find someone who's given up alcohol and drugs, and suddenly they are just into major sugar and food addiction, or they're into gambling addiction, or they've glommed on to someone and there's a relationship addiction or a sex addiction. And I think most people on the planet these days have a screen addiction. And I know for myself, if I'm uncomfortable in my skin for whatever reason, or I'm feeling at odds, I pick up my phone and I scroll. And it's like, just let me out of this uncomfortable feeling. And I think, yeah, unfortunately, technology has made that just way too easy to do. But to not pick up a phone, to not scroll or go online in whatever way, and instead sort of try to sit with it and then identify what it is that's kind of behind it, and actually get into that somatic experience of what is happening here. Yeah, it takes a lot of discipline.
And that feeling uncomfortable, which we would really like to avoid, is really something trying to tell us something, don't you think?
Yeah.
It's,
Oh, absolutely.
and so if we numb it rather than listening to it, we can't get better. So we've mentioned, okay, you got to do the work, which is bad news. It's hard and it's something
But
I'm
it's great news.
avoiding.
But it's great news too. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you. And I wanted to flip that around to say, but what's on the other side is better than what you've ever experienced before.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that matters. Otherwise, why bother?
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, that's for sure. Sort of like with the men in the rooms at first, just keep coming to meetings, plug in the jug, listen to that. It's sort of like, no, I feel like shit here. Why would I want to continue with this? And so absolutely, Linda, you make such a good point. It's got to be so much better. It's got to be drawing us in to the point where we want to embrace life and we are excited about getting up in the morning.
I like that. So I'd love to talk a little bit about self-love. We talked
Mm.
before about deciding that we're worthy. So how does self-love, how are you able to love yourself? And can you think of any reason why you wouldn't love yourself from the beginning?
Mm. That's lots of questions.
Sorry.
Lots to unpack there. I'm going to go to the why we wouldn't love ourselves from the beginning. For myself, and I can't speak for anyone else here but myself, I was taught not to. I was taught from a very young age that I was not good enough. And it appeared in different ways. One of them was, Patti, you have too much energy. Patti, you're hyper. Patti, sit down. Patti, be quiet. So that was the beginning. And another one was, if I was too much, not only too hyper, quote unquote, which I really dislike that word, but too much. Patti, you're too big for a room was another one I heard. And I wasn't ladylike. I wanted to run around outside and climb trees and ride horses when I could and do whatever I could to use this energy instead of being ladylike and doing things that, were more according to what my father especially thought was the way that we should behave. When either Karen or I got anything less than an A on a report card, we were reprimanded, not told we did great for those two A's, but we didn't try hard enough with those two B's, kind of thing. In other words, nothing was ever good enough. We were never good enough. So I was taught that at a young age. And I think that many people, most women that I've spoken to on this topic, learned that. They learned in their dysfunctional families that they were not lovable. So that one's a little bit easier. The next question that you asked was, how do we show self-love? That was one of the other questions, and you had one more in there too that I'm not remembering, but I will go to help.
Something about how did you decide that you were lovable? You were taught that you weren't, which wasn't true.
Yes.
So when did you decide, wait a minute, my parents were wrong?
I'd love to say that it was a moment where I just said, wait a minute, yes, I am. It wasn't. It took a while. That was through therapy. That was through work as an adult child of an alcoholic. That's a whole program, and doing the work in adult children of alcoholics. It was working. I did psychodrama work with a therapist in New Zealand with a whole group of women, and I did that for maybe 3 years. With this group of women. It was amazing, and doing the psychodrama and just really peeling back layers. I worked with several different therapists, and one therapist in particular that worked with me around self-love, around the fact that that I was enough, that I did deserve the space that I took up, that I was okay just like me, that I didn't have to people please. Oh my God, that's something else that we learn in our dysfunctional families. I can, just speak for myself, but both my sister and I learned that if we just did this one thing, fill in the blank, then things would be all right. And we learned to walk on eggshells and be hyper vigilant about how to diffuse situations, about what we could do to make everything okay. And so obviously we weren't enough because the house was falling apart. This house of cards was just absolutely falling to bits. So my sister and I, weren't okay. And I'll speak for myself. I was not okay, because if I was okay, I wouldn't be in the midst of this, house of cards that was in shambles and falling apart. So it took a lot of time, focus, energy to get to a point where I could say, okay, I'm going to claim this space. I'm okay as I am. And that does take work. I mean, it really does. It takes a lot of work. Even saying that now, to be honest, Linda, even just saying that, I sort of cringe and go, yeah, and I have to really sit up straight and say, I'm okay. And as an author and coming on shows like yours, I definitely experience imposter syndrome. I absolutely experience it. Like, okay, you talk a good story, Patti, but I mean, be honest. Be honest. Who do you think you are on being on Linda's wonderful show? So that voice, it's still in there.
And that's something we kind of have to continue to work with. There's a phrase that you've used 3 times that I caught. When you were little, you were told you're too big for a room. And then later you mentioned that you deserve to take up the space that you do. And then you talked about claiming your space. And I think that that's fascinating. So a lot of times we feel like I don't even deserve the space that I take up. I'm almost a bother to the world and to humanity because I'm here. And
Yes.
to be able to get to a place where you can say, no, I'm here and my being here is good. I make it a better place because
Yeah.
I'm in it.
Yeah.
And to be able to trust yourself and believe in yourself to take up that space and to not feel like your job is to be invisible,
Yeah.
shrink, in fact, just disappear. No, no, I'm here. And it is good that I'm here. I
Yeah.
think that matters. And I kind of feel that that's part of your journey. It's
Yeah.
like, I'm
Absolutely.
here and I
Absolutely.
matter.
Yeah. And I think it's the journey of so many women, Linda. So many
Mhm.
women. We as women are taught quite often that, we should just shh, 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 shh. And it takes a lot of force. I mean, mind you, you're younger than me, so luckily you've pulled forward, or you're born into a time that's a little bit easier. But it's still, as women, there's still an expectation, ma'am, that we serve and that we're here for, and all of those other pieces. And it takes a real effort and a real uh, commitment, a commitment to claim our space. And I believe that we as women have to do that quite consciously to say, I deserve it. I'm 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 enough, and I deserve this space. And it was only after, unfortunately, I'd love to say yes, I came to this organically and I felt it internally and et cetera. But it was only after I had been out in the world speaking a bit and talking about my first book and having workshops that I had people come to me and saying, I love your energy. I love the way you hold a room. I love what you bring into the room. And it was only after I had that feedback that I could completely own it. I'd love to say I just came upon it organically, but I didn't.
I'm so grateful for those people who spoke up because you needed that.
Mm,
Isn't it interesting when you go back to the very beginning as a child, those things that were your strengths
absolutely. Oh, that
were
just gave me
not,
chills. Absolutely.
they weren't recognized or appreciated.
Yeah,
The
that's
attempt
it in a nutshell. Yeah.
was to squash them. So now that you recognize, hey, who I am, like the me that was always there, has something to offer. These talents, this drive that's within me is a good thing. I mean, of course, it
Yeah.
needs to have its time and space. Little kids can be kind of like a bull in a china closet, but that
Right.
it's not a bad thing. We just need to develop those talents.
That's right.
That's beautiful. Well, I'm so happy that you can own it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And it's taken a lot of work to get there. It definitely has, because I did learn to pull in, to try and disappear. And that was one of the things that, drinking and drugging did, is it put me out there again, and I could be in that place
Mm.
without, when I was sober and um, uncomfortable, I'd pull in and disappear. So it took a while for me to get to a place where, no, I can own this. I can be this. And just exactly what you said, Linda. It is one of my gifts that I was born with. I have an effervescent energy. And sometimes, yeah, it can be a lot, but it can also brighten up a room. And I can own that now. I can own it. And there are times that, yeah, I can be a bull in a china shop and I've got to rein her in. But I have to learn to ameliorate that, to know the time and the place as it is. But
And that comes with practice. That we don't need to be squashed. We just need to
absolutely
we
not.
just need to work and strengthen our talents and find a place to
That's
put it.
right. That's right.
Oh, this has been a beautiful conversation. I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing. As we speak, I feel like the more that we speak and the more that people feel like I'm not alone, it gives hope. And you've mentioned several times that it's hard. So if someone's listening and they feel like, but I tried, it's like, you know what? You're not alone in that either. It
No.
takes some effort and it takes some time, but it's worth it.
It is so worth it. It is so worth it. And it does, it does take time. And I love the quotes, it's not how many times you fall down, it's how many times you get up. So I quote unquote failed several times. I relapsed. I relapsed for longer than I was clean and sober, but I got up again. And I made a mess of things several times, but I went out and I cleaned up my side of the street when I did. And it does take work. It does take focus. It isn't easy, but oh my God, it's worth it. What better thing is there in life than having real self-love? And with that self-love, wanting to share love.
I think that's the best. I think it's
Yeah.
absolutely the best. Is that the message you'd like to leave us with? Is there anything else you want to make sure we cover?
Well, that's as good a one as any, isn't it? Absolutely. Because basically, we cannot pour from an empty cup. We cannot. Therefore, we have to have a full cup to be able to share. We have to have self-love to be able to love.
Mm. I need to love myself. It's not selfish. It's like the beginning. It's like so that I have something to give. Isn't
Yeah.
that lovely?
Isn't that wonderful?
You have permission. You have permission to love yourselves. Both Patti and I, we give it
Absolutely.
freely.
Completely. We encourage you to and hope that you do.
Yes, absolutely. In closing, I'd like to share a quote from recovered.org. The goal isn't to be sober. The goal is to love yourself so much that you don't need to drink. Today, I invite all of our listeners to love ourselves. See you next time on Linda's Corner.
Thanks for listening. Please share and subscribe to help us reach new listeners. And if you'd like to heal your life from the inside out, there is a free video series at hopeforhealingfoundation.org. Just click on the free stuff tab. I also invite you to grab a copy of one of my books, like Crushed, A Journey Through Depression, and You Got This, an action plan to calm fear, anxiety, worry, and stress. See you next time on Linda's Corner.